Thank you, everyone, so much for coming. I guess our agenda tells us that I'm starting with opening remarks. So the first question is apparently what session priorities passed. So I had introduced a handful of bills this year, some of which passed, some of which were works in progress, and some of which died on the vine. I was particularly pleased with two pieces that got passed. The first was HB 6639, and it was an act that requires the speedy holding of hearings for temporary child support and alimony in divorce cases. And I am a family law attorney, so I know that it is fairly easy for dependent spouses to really lose out in court if they are financially coerced and pressured into settling cases because they don't have any money. And it's pretty easy to starve somebody into submission, and divorced women are a third more likely to retire into poverty than any other demographic in the country. And 40 to 45% of the single mothers in Connecticut live in poverty. So this was a really important bill that will at least even the playing field so they can get to a more fair and equitable settlement, or until they can get into a front of a judge who can give them a fair and equitable outcome. So that was really important to me. I've been working on that bill about 5 or 6 years in the background. So it had unanimous bipartisan support out of the committees and out of both chambers. And it was one of the first bills that the governor signed this year. So I was really, really happy about that. You guys have also heard, if you're on my newsletter, you heard about the bears. And obviously we're going to be back for, no pun intended, another bite at the apple next year. We only got part way in terms of the things that we need to do to increase bear safety and to reduce human bear conflict and to reduce bear habituation. So there were a number of provisions passed that will permit people to defend themselves and to use lethal methods to do that, and to permit farmers with a permit from DEEP to protect their crops, and to prevent intentional feeding of wildlife. But like we did here in Simsbury, I believe that the state needs to go one step further to prevent that unintentional feeding. You know, people need to be more responsible about getting bear lock lids for their garbage cans or putting their garbage into their garages, and it becomes intentional feeding after a while if you keep leaving it out and the bears keep munching on it. So we know that Simsbury is leading the state in bear sightings this year, and we really have to act in order to reduce the potential for danger to people. So I'll be back at that again next year. I'm going to hold off on what I think the most important things are that we still have to tackle. But what I know is that I sat on 3 committees this year. I sat on the Judiciary Committee, I sat on the Appropriations Committee, and I sat on the General Law Committee. And Judiciary does exactly what it sounds like. It does bills that concern the laws about courts and about penalties for civil actions and about criminal penalties and criminal consequences. So we did a number of things in Judiciary, probably the ones you've heard the most about that may or may not impact your lives most are that we passed a big gun safety bill this year. It has some provisions that supporters of gun safety really like and gun proponents don't like, but there are also a couple provisions that gun safety people don't like that gun proponents do like. So there was a bit of a mixed bag there. And some of the provisions that may impact you are things like safe storage. It has been extended from safe storage in homes where children are present to everybody. There was an expansion of the assault weapon ban this year. There is now a ban on ghost guns, all ghost guns going forward starting in 2024, I believe. And there's a ban on open carry, which isn't something that I thought was a thing in Connecticut so far, but it's not going to become a thing now anyhow because there's a ban on open carry in Connecticut now. What else did we do about guns? Let me take a look at my cheat sheet. One of the things that proponents of gun ownership have been asking for that we did address this year is that there were some delays in the applications for handgun permits. And there were some local authorities that were just simply not paying any attention to them. And that was a constitutional problem. It was a due process problem. So that was included because we can't pick and choose our constitutional protections that we like or don't like. And if there is a due process problem that is not being adhered to, I think it's important for everybody who supports our form of government, who supports our Constitution, to make sure that it's being adhered to. So we did provide for a provision where if a local authority is ignoring an application, that there's another level to go to for that permit to be granted. And that's the majority of what we did in the gun safety bill. Some things that are going to be cooking on judiciary, I think, in the near future. I think we're going to be doing a revision of the Board of Pardon and Paroles that you probably heard a lot about in the news. And there was a provision that does permit, there was a bill that was proposed that would have allowed for a different parole application for people who committed crimes under the age of 25. Because there's a lot of conversation going on about what is the real age of responsibility, when are kids' braids really done forming? And that was a bridge too far for many people, and the compromise came out at the age of 21. So there's no automatic parole or anything like that, but they do get a different parole provision at the age of 21 if they were under the age of 21 when they committed their crime. After serving X amount of years, they can have sort of a second look after serving X percentage of their sentence. And the answer may very well be, no, that was too bad, and you can't have earlier parole. But the answer may be that this is a person who really wasn't mature enough yet to make these decisions. But it's just a possibility now where it wasn't before. My bill got passed. We did a bunch of voting stuff too, right?
Yep.
That's not on either of our committees, but y'all all have probably heard 14 days of early voting. I'd love to talk about housing later, but I'd like to turn it over to Senator Seminara and have her give an update on what she was focusing on prioritizing.
Sure. So I didn't, when I introduced myself, I didn't tell you that I am a licensed clinical social worker by trade. And I also always love to tell people or make people aware that I'm a mother of 3, and that's really what I did for a very long time, was stay home and with my children. And one of my children has disabilities, and she's no longer a child. She's 24 years old. And that was really the impetus of me getting involved in the community. I started off on a community level in Avon. I started a nonprofit, and I also started the Avon Special Ed PTA, and I also helped Simsbury start their special ed PTA as well. And then I was served on the Board of Education for a while, and then eventually got elected to the Senate. So the committees that I was that I sat on, and the Senate runs a little bit differently because we don't have as many members, especially my caucus. We only have 12 members of my caucus. So I had to sit on 4 committees, and 3 of those committees I am the ranking member, which is, so I rank on aging, children's and human services, and then I am a member also of education. So I thought my update, I would just give you really what was worked on in my committees and things that I played a role in, and then we could take it from there, answering any questions that you might have. So in the aging committee, things of note that were put in the budget in particular, it expands eligibility for Medicaid long-term care services and expands Husky C, which is Medicaid coverage for people who are 65 and older, people who are blind, and those who are living with disabilities. And the bill raised the threshold from 105% to 143%. So what that actually means in money terms is an individual who was getting $700 is now getting $1,276, and a 2-person family who was getting $946 is now getting $1,725. And this will go into effect October 1 of 2014. I'm sorry, 2024. Thank you. Thank you for telling me that. Also, what was passed was an act concerning, I'll give you these very long well, I don't need to read the whole.
And the titles
The
change.
titles change, and then what
But things
goes
that are
in
under the
them
titles change.
as well. But another bill that was passed was to study the needs of senior citizens in the state in order to ensure that allocations for adequate resources. So that bill included that if somebody who is living or residing in a nursing home is going to be involuntarily transferred, that the family needs to be made aware, and the ombudsman also needs to be aware immediately of the transfer, so that if someone is being transferred, that proper aftercare plans can be made. There is also in the bill that nursing homes develop a council, a family council, so that family members who are coming to visit their loved ones can partake in a family council that's put on through the nursing home. It also requires OPM to develop a plan and a timeline to transfer homemaker companions agencies. So the homemaker companion agencies have been under the auspice of OPM, and now they're going to be changed to, they've been under the auspice of DCP, which is Department of Consumer Protection, and now will be under DPH, which is the Department of Public Health. And this bill was very controversial for a while, and I'm happy to say that I played a very large role in it. So the homemaker services and companion services are very often confused by people that they will provide medical services, which they do not. They're not licensed to do that. And sometimes that hasn't been conveyed properly. So the idea was to take the word care out of their advertisements and their literature, and I really didn't think that would change very much in terms of people understanding. So what was negotiated was that the word care can still be used in their titles, but they have to very clearly make on their literature in a certain font and in a certain color that says that they don't provide medical care, that they provide homemaker care and companion services. And also anybody getting services from them would have to sign off on that so that they understand. So those are the bigger things that came out of aging. I also sat on children's, and the big things that came out of children's were that safety, storage, and disposal of prescription drugs and cannabis have to be labeled. And they'll get a label from the pharmacy, big bright label saying danger to children, keep out. And so that's to for cannabis and opioids and some other controlled substances. The other thing, other very large, and I should preface and tell you this as well, and Rep. Osborne will concur, some of the bills are what they call aircraft carriers. And the bills have a title that's a very broad title, and then there's about, depending on the bill, 40, 50, 60, sometimes 70 different things that are packed into the one bill. So SB2 was an aircraft carrier. And so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what was in there. But the bill was drafted overall to improve mental, physical, and emotional health services for children and to provide a continuum of care. And it generally addresses the mental health services for children, ongoing mental health needs we are seeing in this state that the mental health needs of everyone, but children in particular, have been on the rise for years. There was a lot of legislation that was passed last session to address that, but as time has continued, there's more that needs to address that. So we also in this state, just so you know, have a huge problem with workforce. So workforce development in the health industry especially. We have a very hard time with social workers, licensed psychologists, psychiatrists. So this reduces the fees for various people so that we can hopefully entice people to come here and work. It also increases Husky healthcare. It provides Medicaid reimbursement for certain mental health evaluations. And it also makes a task force to evaluate children's needs. This was the bill, I just want to tell everybody, that had a portion in it that addressed sexual education. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that I got thousands of emails on this bill. And I am happy to say that that portion was removed before we voted on this bill, because there was a lot of people who were very concerned as to what might be taught to children at schools in school level, but we got that taken out.
I will say that was something that was surprising to me, how many emails you get, depending upon the committees you sit on. Well, I sat on Appropriations, which is the committee that hands out the money, and I sat on Judiciary, which does the most controversial bills usually in any given session. And I was getting 1,500 emails a day at one point. It was outrageous. Wine and groceries. Who knew how many people were concerned with wine and groceries? One way or the other, people had really strong opinions about it. And they just do these bot emails, and they're over and over and over, and you can't see your real email inside it. It's crazy.
So I'm going to just kind of continue rolling on, and then we're also going to give you certainly an opportunity to ask any questions. But in education, because a lot of you might be interested in what went on with education, huge thing in the budget, we fully funded the education. So I'm going to say in 2017, a bill was passed to over a 10-year period, give more money towards education. And what the legislature decided to do this year was to expedite that and not drag it out to 2010, but to fully fund the excessive cost grant is what it's called this year. So it will finish out in year 2025. Every school district will be fully funded by then. And again, that was to address a huge need that I'm sure it's happening here, because I just saw an advertisement for teaching people, Simsbury looking for teachers. But there is a huge shortage of teachers. There's a huge shortage of kids or people learning to be teachers. And this bill is to try to address workforce issues in that area, as well as fully fund the schools so that they can address the failing, and our schools are failing very badly in especially science and math, just so you know. Maybe not Simsbury in particular, but as a whole, scores have dropped significantly. So the other thing that it did, one of the bills did, and I think it's very important to mention because I did get a number of emails, again, Simsbury included, about the excessive cost grant. So the budget fully funded the excessive cost grant, and what the excessive cost grant is funding for special education. So every year, your school district has to pay for special education. And for a very long time now, historically, the state used to fund that. And then the municipalities would have to pick up a little bit. Well, for several years now, the state has minimally funded that, and the local municipalities have had to pick up that cost. And the issue is the local municipalities never know how much this is going to cost, because you never know how many students with special needs you're going to have. So it really was a budgetary issue for every one of my municipalities talked to me about this excessive cost grant. And I knew it, and I knew all about it, and how the shift went from the state covering that to the municipalities covering that. So that I'm happy to say that the state recognized that this year, and they are going to fully fund the excessive cost grants only after each town reaches their threshold. So I want to be clear about what that means. So every town, there's a set amount that you spend per child, okay? And for special education, you have to spend 4.5 of what it costs to educate a typical child. Once you meet that threshold as a municipality and you pay 4.5 times the amount that the remaining cost, and you would think, how much remaining cost could there be? But
Oh, yeah.
to sometimes educate a special education student can cost hundreds
of
thousands of dollars.
So just by way of example, Simsbury spends $16,000 typically per pupil. So once we spend more than 16,000 times 4.5, we're the people who do math here. That's a lot of money, around $80,000-ish dollars. After we've spent $80,000, the state will start kicking in, I believe, 80% of the cost above that amount.
Correct.
So if you have a child who you are placing out of town in a residential treatment program, we could be spending $250,000 on one child. So to have that excess cost grant fully funded can be really significant. So that's a really big accomplishment. We dealt with that a lot on appropriations. I remember when your bill came in, to deal with that. Obviously, the holy grail would be a 100% reimbursement of special education costs, but there are a whole bunch of reasons that isn't happening yet, but it doesn't mean we can't keep pushing for that.
Some of the other things that you might find particularly applicable to Simsbury, we've made it now mandatory that financial literacy be taught at the high school. It's a requirement now for every high school to teach that. And again, what we found was there were kids graduating, again, maybe not from Simsbury, but kids graduating who didn't even know how to write out a check or endorse a check or even know what a check is. So we've made that, and I'm not for unfunded mandates, but this isn't really, it's a mandate, but it's not unfunded. And what I mean by that is this is a half a credit, and we didn't make an additional half a credit necessary. We just made it, you had to take this course. So the other thing that was added in this year that you may or may not be interested in is script is now being put back into cursive writing.
Really?
Is now being put back into
I
the
didn't know that.
curriculum.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
My child cannot read the notes that I write. It's pretty amazing.
So now every child is going to have to take cursive
Yay.
again, which I'm very happy about.
That's great.
Again, and that coming out of, there are kids that do not have a signature. They have no idea. They
Yep.
print their name.
My 18-year-old has no idea how to have his
So,
own signatures and print a thing.
and a lot of
True fact.
people argued against it, believe it or not, saying that everything is computerized. Why would you need? And, the majority of people on the education committee felt it was very important that kids still learn how to use cursive writing. So I feel like I'm talking a lot, and I have a lot more to present to you, and I can if you want me to, but if you want to take a break and we kind of take some questions. I do want to tell you a little bit about human services, though. There was a huge bill passed in human services. I'm very proud to say I took a part in, which was 5001 was the bill
Yep.
number. And it was a bill long time coming, and it allocates resources for people with intellectual disabilities. Connecticut is sort of behind the pack here in that we have huge waiting lists for people with intellectual disabilities to get into housing, for example, supportive housing. So this addresses that. This bill was huge. It had huge bipartisan support. It made it through the appropriations. It also made it through the House and the Senate unanimously. So you can tell it was a bill that everybody really cared about. And it covers a lot of things. It does cover the waiting lists. And it also covers
Transition academies?
transition academies, which is for people with disabilities, that their transition planning start at age 14, so that by the time they age out at 21, there's a plan in place as to where they're going and what they're doing. And there is things to address transportation, because a lot of times people with disabilities cannot drive themselves. So this is they have a segment to address transportation and making sure that people with disabilities can get, if a lot of my district is up in the northwest corner, sorry. And it's like a transportation desert up there. There's no transportation. So this bill will hopefully address some of that. And the bill also, the one thing that I wanted it to do and it didn't do, and this is something that I hope will be addressed next session, is using IQ as a defining factor for somebody to receive benefits. So just so you know, Connecticut is one of 2 states in the country that still does it this way. The only other place that does it, was it Arkansas? I think it was Arkansas. I'm looking at Brianna, sorry. There's Arkansas is the only other place. So somebody who has an IQ, a higher IQ, doesn't necessarily mean that they don't need services. And there is a whole group of people with disabilities that have been really left out of getting very needed assistance because their IQ, and this is particularly with the autism population, I'm just letting you know, that they are not able to get services because we still as a state look at IQ as a determination of whether somebody should be disabled or not.
So thank you for bringing that up, because that was a bill that Mike D'Amico and I initially co-sponsored at the beginning of session. And like Lisa was saying before, Senator Seminara was saying before, some bills become omnibus bills. They're aircraft carriers. And 5001 combined a whole bunch of different bills into one place to address all these different IDD ideas. And I knew about IQ and IDD using it as a cutoff as a real problematic area because I served as a child protection attorney. And some of the parents that I would run into who were in juvenile court because they had neglect cases pending with DCF, it's because their IQ was 71. And if their IQ were 70, they could have gotten services as adults. but because they're 71, they qualify for no services. And there is simply no substantive difference between somebody with an IQ of 70 and IQ of 71, except that it means that they don't get the services they need in order to be able to parent adequately, to live independently. So that is an area that I have known about for a long time, and I'm happy that one of the constituents that we have here in town brought that to my attention. And I'm really happy, the bill that we said that we introduced would have eliminated it. But right now, the fact is that will cost an extra $200 billion if we were to completely eliminate IQ. That was the estimation that I received. So what this bill does do is put into 5021 a study to say what is the best and most effective way. How should we define disability in terms of how we deliver services? So it's long overdue that it get taken a look at, and thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate that.
Sure. So again, I can continue going on and on and on, but I feel like we should.
I forgot to talk about pot. Everybody wants to talk about pot in this town lately. And I served on the General Law Committee, which is where all the pot and alcohol, it's the booze, it's the wine and groceries, and it's the marijuana. So we did do some marijuana bills this year. Mostly it was cleanup, technical regulations. A lot of our general law public hearings surrounded these Department of Consumer Protection bills concerning how we are managing the use of cannabis now that it's a retail issue. I was particularly concerned about the packaging, about not having too many servings in one packlet, especially of chocolate, because I don't care if it's scored into nice little things. If it's chocolate, I'm eating it, right? So I was really concerned about not making it attractive to children, making sure the packaging wasn't attractive to children, making sure that there wasn't too much in one serving so you couldn't overdose on it. And some of the legislation that we ended up passing also addressed, there's some issues with this. Is it Delta 8 or 9? I'm not remembering right now, but there's an issue with hemp products that are supposed to be CBD showing up in convenience stores in these vape pens that are actually at very, very high concentrations of hemp. And the kids can walk into the Cumberland Farms or whatever and buy it. So we drastically reduced the amount of hemp that can be in these products to try to keep that product safer for children.
And then one other quick thing I just wanted to add, I was flipping through my notes that I received an incredible amount of emails on was also this year the legislation changed the age for kindergarten.
Yes.
The starting age for kindergarten.
Yep.
So the starting age for kindergarten now is 5, and you have to be 5 in September. Mm-hmm. So
right now you can be 5 on December 31st. So it's a
hold on. I have
September. I think it's September 1st, if I recall.
Yeah, it's the 1st.
So you're making it a mandate at the state level to the local.
Right. I remember the legislation is that if you have a parent who has a child who is still 4 at that age, they can apply to the town to say, I would like my 4-year-old who will be 5 by December 31st to be able to attend, and the town will do some assessments, some placement testing, and if it's appropriate, then the child can attend. But so much of that is social emotional stuff that kids just aren't quite there yet for.
Just quickly on this subject, it follows a different pattern so that you can become universal across the state.
Yes.
And you will have, or have you already had fight back from the individual school districts?
So
I'm hoping they're being receptive.
I believe they are. The fight back or the kickback or fight back, if you want it, is coming from the parents.
Sure.
So the parents have to pay another year of preschool, which for some parents
Or
is
childcare. Yeah.
or childcare, and some parents that's a lot. That's very taxing on them. So this option that was put in as an amendment, sort of very late in the game, which I really liked, which is what Melissa or Rep. Sorry.
Lisa, Melissa.
Yeah. What she talked about, which is that the school will do an evaluation and the principal also has to sign off on whether the child is ready to attend school prior to age 5. And it is September 1 of the year. So the new age to start kindergarten is 5 by September 1 of the school year. And it starts next year, by the way, giving people an opportunity to try to
Make plans.
make plans.
Yeah. So what are some of the things, Lisa, that you want to work on next year?
Well, again, for me, the big thing is that I would love to work on changing the IDD. That is something that I think we're really far behind. Let me think of some of the other ones.
You know, what
I'll
I
let
like
you go.
about this time of year is that, you know, we both started brand new in January. So we were catching up in 2 weeks to introduce all of our legislation. And we can now use this time to talk to all of you and find out what your concerns and needs are. And we can really work on developing and crafting legislation in this time period. So we're really introducing things that everybody here needs. Barbara?
Intellectual developmental disabilities.
Right. Yes, Bill.
Melissa, I wanted to ask you, there was just breaking news the other day. Thank you. There's breaking news the other day about marijuana growing in adult homes. You want to talk about that,
In adult
please?
homes? Yeah. Actually, you know what? Can you use the microphone? Because otherwise they won't pick it up for the television program. Could you repeat that question?
It was in the news, local news recently, that it's now permitted as of July 1 to grow marijuana at home in adult homes. Do you know anything about
By
that?
adult homes, do you mean
Nor adults.
the
Oh,
homes of
private
adults?
homes.
Private homes.
Private
Other than
homes.
like a group home or something. Yes, so that was a bill that was passed in 2021. So we didn't have anything to do with that, just saying. But the law was, and it was passed, and it was phased in over time, that if you're an adult, you can grow up to 6 cannabis plants in your home. It has to be inside, not out in your garden, I guess. And there can only be 3 mature plants at any given time. But that's the law that got passed before we got there. So, and now into effect. Helen?
How in heaven do you regulate such?
Thank you. How in the world do you intend to regulate such a law?
Me personally, I do not. That would be a law enforcement issue, I suppose.
I mean, you have a law on the books,
Right.
and if it's a meaningful one, you would hope that it would have.
I think that's a good question for Chief Bolter.
Well, I'm just saying you put a possibility out there for the public. However, that gives them license, right?
Sure.
So abuse comes. You can't avoid it. And you're just making it easier for abuse. If there is no follow-up with regulation as to have inspections. I mean, how do you possibly manage that?
Should the Department of Consumer Protection be, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, Helen.
Okay,
I
I'm
don't.
just posing it.
Yep, I don't know.
Why is that any different from traffic regulations, and people abuse them too? And only when you cited an abuse, now you have something on the books. 3 was okay, 16 is not okay. So I don't think you have to monitor it, but you have something there that limits it should it occur.
Diane. We can agree or disagree or something. I just find that analogy improper. When you have a law on the book for road use, you do have an opportunity with our policing. It may not be perfect, but there is something to back up that law in place. But when you have some license given to a homeowner and don't back it up, what's the point of having that?
So I guess what I'll say is, A, I wasn't part of passing the law, but I think it's probably, for me, it's less important that they're growing their own marijuana because it's now legal in the state. And you can buy as much marijuana as you want from the store and keep it at home. So I guess I'm not as concerned about it being grown as opposed to being bought. So, and I guess it's not super easy to grow either. So
Raise your hand.
I see a hand in the back.
Sorry.
I see a hand up in the back.
We'll get to you next.
Where's the?
Okay, there's the mic here.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, thank you. I have a couple of questions about education that I'd like to ask. So in this state, there's been some efforts made to do social and emotional learning. The Sandy Hook crowd, the foundation, has done an amazing job providing some school systems with this idea that we can teach kids about emotional intelligence and about emotional competencies and about helping kids to teach kids to be inclusive, not to be bullies, and what to do if bullies show up. I don't know if any of the funding coming from any sources, I did think that there was a concern when marijuana was first on the table that it's going to lead to more abuse and more use. And I wondered if the funding might be channeled into helping kids to be emotionally healthy. I know we're spending money on the mental health side, which is great, but wouldn't it be great to be proactive and teach kids? Because there's a lot of research, especially coming out of the Center of Emotional Intelligence at Yale University. A friend of mine's Mark Brackett, and he's got a ruler program that's implemented in Bridgeport and other towns in the state. But not really, it's not blanketing the state at all. Simsbury doesn't do it. We have character education, it's different. And the idea of getting kids to feel good about themselves, to understand how to deal with issues of depression and sadness and loneliness, which are rampant in our schools today. Wouldn't it be great if we use some of the funding that's available through the state now to promote the idea of getting more social and emotional learning into classrooms so that kids don't have a reason to want to use drugs, that kids don't have a reason to want to abuse alcohol? It just seems to me that we're missing a boat, an opportunity here. The actual inventor or innovator or the first person to write about emotional intelligence, the pioneer, is the president of Yale University, Peter Salovey. If you approached him, he'd be supportive of helping Yale do this across the state. They'd love to do that. So I encourage you to reach out and see if there's something that you might do there. One other thing I'd like to address is the special education. We have a daughter who's a special education teacher. There was a new IEP process put into the schools this past year. Do you know about it?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so with all the money that needs to be channeled to help support smaller caseloads for teachers in these roles, the new IEP process, from most people's perspectives, was not received well, right?
Yes, I'm very well aware of that. I met with a number of people who represented, I attended several meetings on this particular issue because I think it is rampant throughout the state. A lot of teachers really had a difficult time completing that paperwork
Right.
and being able to continue to do all their other demands. So I know that that is being looked at, and the teachers' union, that was one of the issues that they presented as a huge issue for us to reconsider that.
The technology, because the technology didn't work often,
Yes.
and it was a nightmare for a lot of teachers. So my question is, if you're going to spend a fair amount of money, I imagine, on a new system, that you pilot it with teachers before you implement.
Well, I think I'm not sure if they're going to spend a large amount of money on a new system. I'll have to examine that further, but I do agree with you that the people who would be using that system should be the people who we should be getting the input from.
Okay.
Wholeheartedly agree with you there.
Okay, thank you.
You're jogging my memory actually as to, you said something or Rep. Osborne here said something that I would like to see happen next year. So we are spending an exorbitant amount of money to educate our children, and I'm not saying we shouldn't. Our children are our future. But one of the things that I would like to see happen next session is some bills that make the school districts accountable for the money that we're giving them. And I will be
I agree.
honest.
Yeah, that's great.
I feel that we spend a lot of money and we continually give money to our educational system. But we have a very poor checks and balances system and accountability in making sure that our kids are getting educated in the things that they should be getting educated in our school districts. And that's back to the academic basics.
It's a huge challenge because you've got Simsbury and then you've got other places like Bridgeport where you're going to see very different variables that impact people's ability to raise scores in schools. So.
Right, so Chuck, this actually, we do so many things bipartisanly up at the legislature. So much of what we do, and Lisa and I work together so well on a bipartisan basis. I would go a little further though, and again, some of this comes back to my experience as a child protection attorney. I've been in the homes of families who are often caught up in the neglect judicial system, not because they're bad people, but because they don't have any money, or because there may be domestic violence or substance abuse. But there are so many more things that go into a child's ability to learn than what a teacher is teaching them or how a teacher is teaching them. And
Right.
I personally, and this is something that nobody is going to fund in the state of Connecticut. Let's just be really honest about this. Children who are living in traumatic environments and who are hungry and who are worried about the noise in the next room because mom's getting hit by
Right.
whoever, they can't learn. And there's no amount of money we dump into that school that is going to make that child able to learn when they're worried about mom and they're worried about being hungry, and they're really living those things over and over in their brain when they're at school. And there's that comes back to the social emotional learning, comes
Right.
back to emotional regulation,
Right.
teaching, but it's about more than education. So, Lisa's right in many respects that we dump a ton of money into some of these schools.
Right.
But until we start spending money on things like childcare for single moms, trauma therapy, until we're actually willing to dump that kind of money into those kinds of programs, we are not going to see those schools perform better.
Right. No, I agree with that.
And I'm not saying I have the magic answer to any of this, but let's be honest about the things that go into this, and that we as a society have made some choices. We're willing to dump money into the education and to keep dumping it in, but we're not willing to dump money into solving the trauma that keeps these kids from being able to learn.
If I could give you can I give you one example of a transient neighborhood that I work with Mark, the fellow at Yale, in schools when he was first starting out. And one of the things we did was we tried to help teachers who were dealing with kids who were coming from really tough backgrounds. Because one of the teachers we were working with said he really struggled every morning to try and get the school day started because the kids had so much stuff they were coming in with. It was so filled up with the things from home that you're talking about. But what he decided, because one of the things he learned was if people aren't feeling the way you want them to feel, how do you get them to feel what would be ideal to feel so that they're ready for school? And he realized that if I asked the kids about how are you feeling, what's going on for you, takes 5 to 10 minutes in the beginning of the day, allows the kids to let go of what's happening inside their heads about home, and they were beautiful the rest of the day. So this is just a simple story about something that made a big difference with kids who were struggling with things that were happening at home.
And Chuck, I'd love to continue this conversation afterward, but I know we have some more hands up.
That's right.
We're
Okay,
pushing
thank you.
7.
I have just one thing on a lighter note. I just want to know, how can you tell when a marijuana plant is mature? That's all.
I'm gonna go back and forth. Did you have your hand up?
This gentleman in the back did it earlier. Thanks.
I'll hold on to it.
Thank you. So in regards to disability and housing stuff in Simsbury, a thing that I've been running into personally is my older sister, 10 years older than me, is disabled, and my parents are also looking to get into a nursing home, and they want to remain with her, but she can't get into any nursing homes because she's too young and stay with my parents. So we either have to separate my sister and I take care of her at 30 years old alone, or my parents go to a nursing home alone. There's no way to keep our whole family together. So that's been a big issue. And also thank you for passing SB 9 in the Senate. That was very important. But the housing issue for me, myself, my sister, and family going forward, that'd be really good to see that addressed in some way or some option so that these nursing homes can't keep denying my sister, who needs a place to live like this, just because of her age.
How old's your sister?
She's 40, I'm 30.
Okay, so you and I can certainly have a conversation, but again, 5001, the bill that I spoke about, really goes to address that and to address people who are in need of housing, those who have disabilities, and we have a huge waiting list now, but we can certainly talk about what options might be available for your sister. But we can talk about that after this, if that's okay with you.
You good?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think that was
Give
it
you my
for now.
card so we
Thank
can
you.
talk after. Okay. Anybody else?
So, one of the things while you're getting over to, Alan's right there, go for it.
I'll be right over. There you go.
I'm going to take you in a different direction. This is about the AI bill, which seems rather modest. But so 2 questions from that. First, do either of you know how AI was defined? What constitutes AI? Secondly, more broadly, on a bill like that that's so cutting edge and so technical, where does the legislature go to get its information? How do you know what you're talking about, basically? Thanks.
I don't know.
That's a super good question.
I will say, I think both of those questions are excellent, and I am not prepared to answer either one of those this evening. I'm sorry about that, but I can take down your name and your information and certainly work on getting answers for those questions for you. I know that was, I think that was.
It was a general law bill.
It was a general
law bill. It's new, it's cutting edge, and like Lisa, we did that bill really, really early in the session. But it's a really important area of law right now, and I think Connecticut is at the forefront of that, and I'm really glad that we addressed that this year. But I would have to go back and read up on it again to answer that specific question, truth be told. Sorry.
And I apologize, I was a little late, so maybe you addressed this before I got here, but there was not a lot of environmental legislation that passed this session, and I know there was a pretty good-looking solar aircraft carrier that probably had some things in it that were going to be a stretch, but it had a lot of pretty good common sense stuff in it too, and it sort of died on the vine, and I wonder if you had any perspective on why. And maybe sort of as a part of that, you talked a lot about workforce. Was there any stuff that you were aware of on sort of clean energy workforce development as well?
I am not aware of anything for clean energy workforce development.
There were some things in general law about permitting around solar things, and I have to take a look at whether specifically. I remember we did them. I don't remember exactly what they are now, but there were some turf wars between different licensees. So we did address some of that. But you're right. Everybody knows there was a dearth of environmental bills this year. There were a bunch of things that died that we were just not able to get sufficient support on. Some were much broader than people were willing to go, and the people who wanted the broad bill weren't willing to narrow. That's often what happens. I did a bill this year. Sumasino brought me a topic on old growth forest. And we worked really hard at the beginning of session to get that bill in there. And DEEP ended up killing their entire bill not to have to do old growth forest. So, that's one of the things we'll be back to fight about next year But there are a bunch of environmental things that need to keep moving forward, for sure. And I really see an opportunity for us here in Simsbury. We are going to have to address the housing growth that's going to be required of us at the state level. And I know the majority of people in Simsbury just want it to happen in a way that connects with our community, right? But there are phenomenal opportunities for that housing growth to get married with carport solar. You know, if we're going to put up a big parking lot that's going to go with a new apartment complex, let's do some carport solar. Let's do some rooftop solar. Let's find ways to make sure that we are individually contributing to that effort as well.
Oh, thank you. Real quickly, it's running late. Change the subject completely, but very importantly, the governor has made a very big deal about tax cuts. So I don't know if you can address, maybe we can do this after the meeting, but what about tax cuts for seniors?
So there were tax cuts for seniors in the form of raising the threshold of income that is going to be taxed for seniors in terms of Social Security and pensions and IRAs. And there used to be this cliff, right? You hit 100, and then if you have 101 penny, it's all subject to tax. That's not going to be the case anymore. You get to a certain level and the tax, it starts declining. The benefit starts declining, but there isn't that fiscal cliff for seniors anymore. And one of the bills that I had introduced would have permitted a tax abatement to seniors who already have affordable income levels and live in houses that would otherwise be affordable, would have provided a property tax abatement. And you bet I'm coming back with that again next year. I'm going to do more work on the bill. It had a lot of pushback from people who thought that I was trying to finagle the system and get out of doing affordable housing. I thought it was a good marriage between several different policy goals, and I think it's something we really need to push forward on, and for all those reasons.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I have a little one-page document on the tax cliff and the retirement tax cliff that I will make sure you get.
Thank you, Lisa.
You're welcome. It's a chart and it shows all sorts of things.
I'll take a copy of that too.
Okay. So I will make sure you get that so that you can look at it, and I will answer any questions personally should you need them.
Very kind of you.
You're welcome.
Does anybody have questions about votes we took, or curious about anything? Anyone? No? Okay.
You did have a question, all right?
Yeah, I just quick question. Would you? Oh, I'm probably loud enough.
No, it's
because of the.
Oh, from the SCTV
TV thing.
So when you were addressing and I knew it was up for vote for the kindergarten age, and it is a good idea to raise the age because I was a school bus driver. Those kids, the 4-year-olds, didn't really belong on the bus, but it was not a good mix. But at the same time, was there anything addressed on universal preschool for those who couldn't afford private preschool? Because that's important. That's one of the reasons why these parents were putting those children in the schools, is because they couldn't afford a private preschool. And now what are we going to do with those kids? Those kids are just going to be too much further behind.
There is some money. There is some money
Okay.
that expands preschool in some places. It's not universal. Definitely not universal. Again, it is the law, and everything costs money, right?
Yes.
So, there was a big thing about universal free lunch for everybody. And we did that during COVID with some ARPA money, and a lot of people wanted that to continue. I personally thought that we should raise the income threshold for people to qualify for it. But there are people who live in Simsbury who do need it, and they should be able to have it, but there are lots of people who don't, and I would like any money that is spent for people who don't need free lunch for their children, let's use that money for something else.
And there is another area where Rep. Osborne and I agree.
Agreement. But I think the big elephant in the room right now is housing, right? And so much of this is, for me, the end of session wrap up is as much about what didn't pass and what were we successful in in redirecting as what did pass, right? So I know that housing is such a big topic here in Simsbury right now. Housing growth, planning, apartments, it's a huge topic right now. And I'll tell you, it is probably one of the #1 policy goals at the legislature right now. It's a very active push. And there was legislation pending that would have required towns like Simsbury to put up 1,200 new affordable housing units.
Lisa has my email.
Which with, as 20%, 80% would have meant probably a total of 6,000, 6,500
Thank
new
you.
units in Simsbury. And it would have completely changed the face and you could have changed us from a town into a city, essentially. So we do, in my opinion, as a town, and this isn't a state thing as much as a town, we need to become proactive and we need to become educated and we need to take steps to there is a housing growth, there's a housing shortage all over the country. It's not just Simsbury, it's not just Connecticut, it's everywhere because there have been years and years and years of no additional building or limited additional building. So we need to get proactive and take responsibility for creating the policies here at the town level, for crafting it and integrating it into our town in the way that we want, right? Because it's going to happen. And we need to be a town that takes responsibility for doing it, in my opinion, and does it in a way that we want it to be here, right? Whether it's affordable or market rate, nobody really cares affordable versus market rate in terms of what we have here in town. We just want to make sure that we do it in a planful, thoughtful way. But if we don't do it in a planful, thoughtful way and take responsibility for it, it is going to happen to us at the state level. So my biggest hope is that we get out in front of it.
I'm going to give it to you because you haven't gone yet.
Okay, thank you. So I just have a question about voting, and in particular, the largest demographic of voters I know in Simsbury, and it may be also in Connecticut, is unaffiliated. And when it comes to primaries, we're left on the sidelines. And it's very frustrating to, feel that, I don't have a say in any candidates that appear on my ballot in the fall. And I know the argument that I've heard, when I talk to people online or whatever, is, well, if you really feel strongly about a particular candidate, join their party. Well, there's a reason why I'm unaffiliated. It's because I don't really feel that either party truly represents me, and I don't feel that I should have to join a party to vote for or support a particular candidate. So I would really love to see, your thoughts on open primaries in Connecticut. And, I know that happens in some states, but I would really love to see Connecticut, consider that and move forward with something like that to get people more engaged during primary season, because like I said, for myself, I feel like I'm on the sidelines and it's frustrating.
There are many people. I'm not saying this is good or bad. I'm just trying to provide a solution to your issue that we can deal with it currently. There are many people who are unaffiliated that change their party if they feel particularly strong about a candidate. They go and join the party temporarily, vote in the primary, and then return their status to unaffiliated. Again, I'm not advocating, I'm not saying that's something you should do or not do. I'm just saying there are many, many people who do that if they have a strong feeling about a candidate. But it is certainly something, what you're talking, universal, to be able to vote in a primary is certainly something we could examine.
So, Bill, I don't have a particularly strong opinion about it one way or the other. Yeah. I will tell you that people in political parties, the fear is that if you open the primaries to anybody can vote anyway, then people on one side of an issue or one side of a candidate would vote against the candidate who they thought was strongest in the opposing party. So you knock out the strongest Democrat so that the Republican, and vice versa, right? So that's what the main concern is, I think, And I think the argument that comes from the political parties is that we chose to be in a party. These are the people we want to put up as a party. I'm not saying it's the right argument. I'm saying that is that position. So I think it's unlikely, to tell you the truth. It's not something that I'm not willing to introduce, right? And we can talk about that, and we can work on something. But I think it's unlikely, since you do have a legislature that's made up of two political parties, that they're probably gonna not undermine their own power. That's usually how that goes. Right?
So again, you may have addressed this before I got here, but on the waste issue, one journalist recently wrote that the legislature kicked the can down the road. Is that unfair, or what do you think got done on waste this session?
Because I don't sit on that committee, I can't comment on whether it's fair or unfair. I don't know all the things that went into that. But obviously, we didn't come up with a solution. So. We have another step to take still. We don't have a real solution. We're sending it out of state. We have a new entity to follow up on Mira and get Mira closed down. But sometimes, a lot of times, change is incremental, right?
Yep.
Thank you. Excuse me. I'm sorry, Lisa, did you want to speak to that as well?
My opinion on that is that I'm not. Well, I have a different opinion. I'm not so sure that we should have closed Mira, but I'm not sure.
That horse has left the barn.
I recognize that, and that horse left the barn way before I got into the picture. But my point is, I do think we trucking our waste out is just not a good way to do things.
It's not long-term viable.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, my question relates to Hartford. I know that on more than one occasion, the mayor has gone to the governor and the legislature asking for additional support for the city. And even though we don't live in Hartford, we rely on Hartford for a lot of things. I worked in Hartford for 15 years. So did anything happen in this past session related to providing additional support to Hartford? And do you foresee anything happening in the next session with respect to that?
I don't think we did anything Hartford specific, except to the extent that their delegation, got funding for specific projects or things. I don't think there was a Hartford bailout like there was in the past. There's a mayoral race right now going on. There are 3 or 4 different candidates, and I guess we need to see how that race turns out and see what that delegation requests in the future. Do you have a different opinion?
No. Okay. No, I do not. Yeah.
I'd just like to say, I think we all concur, a note of thanks for coming out this evening. Our representatives, thank you very much.
I do want to say one thing for everyone here, and I say this practically everywhere I go. I, as a freshman legislator, but I don't even think that's going to change if I'm long-term. We learn a little about a lot of things, and we depend on all of you to educate us further on the topics that come before us. So I really, really encourage people to stay engaged with what goes on between the both of us and your town. And I encourage you also to exercise your right and give your feedback to us, because we value it, we listen to it, and I can only speak for myself and say that I really need it. I need to hear from all of you about the things that are important to you so that I can continue to serve you effectively. And I mean that sincerely. Like, I will never not listen to somebody who wants to speak to me or writes my emails or writes me an email or would like to have a phone call or even come visit me at the Capitol, which I like the most. So,
and obviously I completely agree with everything that Lisa just said there. And, I had a meeting with the Girl Scouts the other day. And they asked me, what's the most important part of your job? What's the hardest part? What's the best part? and which topic do you like the best? And what I reminded them of was that anything I'm working on, ultimately, I'm here to serve you guys, right? I'm here to serve the residents of Simsbury and the residents of the state of Connecticut and to try to make a positive difference. So it might be a topic that like AI, not thinking about it a ton right now, right? But that might be something that it becomes super interesting to me because I'm serving somebody else's need. So no matter what we're doing, we are here to serve you, and that's the best part of the job. So.
And the legislature has made it very easy now to come and testify. You can now come in person back. You can come now up to the Capitol and in person, and I will say that's always, for me, the best way, most effective way. But it is effective for you to testify remotely, and you can do that from the comfort of your home, and they give you get an idea of when you'll go, and we love to have testimony that way. And then you can also provide written testimony. And if you're uncomfortable speaking in front of crowds and you prefer to, maybe you prefer to express yourself in writing, we do read all of those things as well. So I really encourage you to stay connected with us. And little plug for myself, if you are not receiving my weekly emails, I send out weekly emails. And there's a sign-up sheet in the back. If you put your name and your email address, I will make sure that you get on the list and you stay informed with what I'm doing in District 8, which is, again, a little bit broader than Simsbury, but I certainly talk about Simsbury quite a bit too. So.
Thank you very much.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.